Hey guys, tonight we step straight into the thick, sooty breath of Victorian London, where the fog isn't just a weather pattern, but a lifestyle choice the city seems a bit too proud of. You arrive with a small bag, a hopeful heart, and the vague sense you probably won't survive this. But don't worry, most people back then didn't either. The streets glisten under gas lamps, horses clatter over cobblestones slick with something you decide not to identify, and chimney smoke curls low enough to brush your coat collar. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're settling in, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stand at the edge of the city, boots sinking slightly into damp mud, as the morning fog folds around you like an unenthusiastic hug. London in the mid-19th century is a creature of noise and smell, always awake, always exhaling coal dust, always somehow a little wet. You trudge forward, feeling the weight of the place settle onto your shoulders like a shawl woven from smoke and ambition. Horse carts rumble by, and a newspaper boy shouts headlines you can't quite understand through the thick accent and thicker smog. Historians still argue whether London's famous pea soup fog was romantic atmosphere or just slow-acting poison with good branding. A woman brushes past you carrying a basket of fish, and the scent suggests those fish had dreams of freedom several days ago. That's your first unofficial introduction to Victorian London's sensory palette: coal, fish, sweat, horse manure, and the faint whisper of hope, usually someone else's hope, not yours. But don't worry, you'll get used to it. Humans can adapt to almost anything, even the smell of the Thames before proper sewage systems. A mainstream historical fact: before the Great Stink of 1858 forced Parliament to act, London's river was so polluted that people said a person could faint simply by leaning over it. Some Londoners swore rubbing onions inside their nostrils helped block the worst of the smell. You're welcome to try it, but be aware that people might give you looks, although frankly, everyone around you looks equally overwhelmed by life. You take your first steps deeper into the city, noting how every sound seems amplified. Carriages creaking, boots clacking, vendors calling, and somewhere in the distance, a street musician valiantly attempting to play a tune on a violin with only 3 strings. It's impressive in a "you tried" sort of way. You navigate around a puddle that might be water or might be something else entirely. You don't test it. London rewards curiosity, but not that kind. The buildings lean close together, tall and sooty, as if sharing secrets above your head. You move under shop signs that swing gently in the weak breeze. Apothecaries, cloth merchants, bakers. A tailor's window displays a suit so sharply cut that it looks like it holds contempt for your entire existence. You duck away quickly. Fashion in London can be hazardous to your self-esteem. As you make your way toward the city center, you feel the shift in energy. People here walk like they have somewhere to be, even if that somewhere is just slightly warmer than their current location. You overhear snippets of conversation, complaints about wages, rumors about railway expansion, and one man muttering that pigeons are government spies. So yes, even then, conspiracy theories found a way. You stop to observe a crowd gathered around a street performer balancing on a rickety stool while reciting Shakespeare. The man gestures dramatically, and the stool wobbles with the sort of determination that suggests it has opinions about this entire performance. One wrong move and he might introduce his face to the cobblestones, but the crowd loves it. Entertainment is entertainment, especially when it has the potential to become accidental slapstick. A light joke floats to mind. You realize that Victorian London basically invented the watch someone almost fall but not quite genre long before the internet perfected it. Moving on, you encounter your first real challenge: navigating London traffic. Horse-drawn omnibuses charge forward like they're in a very slow, very loud race. Drivers shout commands that sound half like insults and half like poetry. Crossing the street becomes a thrilling game of "please don't crush me," And you quickly learn that hesitating in the middle of the road is not an option. Commit or perish. London doesn't wait. Historians still argue whether the city was truly chaotic or simply overachieving at being alive. You spot a group of children darting between carts, selling matches and newspapers. They move with practiced agility, weaving through danger with an ease that makes you feel like you should take notes. One girl offers to shine your boots for a penny, and you consider it until you realize your boots will look exactly the same after, just a bit wetter. Still, you admire the hustle. Victorian London is built on it. As you continue walking, a factory whistle screams in the distance, marking the start of a shift. The sound cuts sharply through the fog, startling your cluster of pigeons into flight. You watch them swirl upward, briefly forming a beautiful shape before immediately dissolving into chaos. It's a perfect metaphor for the city, structured, then spontaneous, then slightly confusing. A man bumps into your shoulder and mumbles an apology, though you realize he's already reaching for the next distraction. People here are always in motion, always hustling, always surviving. You adjust your coat and press on, noticing how the streets widen and narrow at unpredictable intervals. One moment you're on a broad avenue lined with respectable shops, the next you're squeezed into an alley so tight it feels like London itself is giving you a stern hug. You smell bread baking nearby, a rare and pleasant contrast to the rest of the city's aroma playlist. You follow it briefly, imagining the warmth of a bakery after the cold fog, but then the scent fades, replaced by coal smoke again. London giveth, London taketh away. It's fine. You'll eat eventually. Probably. You pause near a newspaper stand and glance at the headlines. Parliament is arguing again, which is absolutely not a shock. Victorians could debate the length of a handshake if given the opportunity. A dusty poster on the wall advertises a new museum exhibit of curiosities from distant lands, promising wonders that may or may not be real. Victorians did love a good mystery, half scholarship, half spectacle. As you step away, you realize the city is starting to feel less foreign, still overwhelming, still loud, still a little grimy, but somehow familiar. The fog curls around your ankles like a cat deciding you're acceptable. You take another deep breath, coal-scented, of course, and let your shoulders relax. You're here. You're surviving, at least for now. And with each step, you feel London unfolding before you, ready to show you what comes next. You keep walking until the fog thins just enough to reveal the next great challenge of surviving Victorian London, finding somewhere, anywhere, to sleep that won't drain your coin purse or your will to live. Lodging in this city is less about comfort and more about negotiating with the universe for a horizontal surface. You pull your coat tighter and glance around, noticing how the street grows livelier as the afternoon deepens. A cluster of chimney sweeps, their faces streaked with soot, chatter outside a pub. A woman sells roasted chestnuts from a tin pan, and two men argue loudly about whether the new railway will destroy civilization. Historians still argue whether the average Victorian genuinely feared trains or just enjoyed having something dramatic to complain about. You pass by a respectable-looking inn with polished brass fixtures, embroidered curtains, and a doorway that practically whispers, "Not for people like you." Inside, you'd get a warm bed, a lock on the door, maybe even a cup of weak tea. Outside, you're reminded that such luxuries cost more than a week's wages for most workers. You give the polished door one wistful look and move on. You need something cheaper, much cheaper. Your first real option appears in the form of a lodging house run by a woman whose expression suggests she has seen every possible human disaster and is not impressed by any of them. She stands at the entrance with arms crossed and a gaze sharp enough to peel wallpaper. The sign above her head advertises "bed 4 pence," which sounds like a bargain until you remember that in Victorian London, bed can mean anything from a straw mattress to a board with aspirations. You step inside for a look. The air is warm but heavy, thick with the scent of damp wool and people who work 16-hour days. Beds line the walls, small, narrow, and close enough together that rolling over in the night requires strategic planning. A mainstream historical fact: many working-class Londoners slept in such shared lodgings, often renting space nightly because long-term tenancy was too expensive. A quirky tidbit: in some places, you could pay even less for the privilege of sleeping sitting up, leaning over a penny rope stretched across the room. Yes, you literally draped yourself over a rope like a Victorian noodle. Cheap, uncomfortable, but popular. You step back outside, trying not to think about the rope bed option. You're adventurous, sure, but not that adventurous. The street dips downward as you walk, leading you toward another cluster of buildings. Here, the atmosphere stiffens. The houses lean at odd angles, balconies sag, and the windows seem to glare down with faint judgment. You find a dosh house, a common word for the city's cheapest lodgings, where a sign promises 4 walls, roof included. You appreciate the honesty. Inside, you will almost certainly find overcrowding, questionable blankets, and the lingering scent of last night's stew, but you'll also find something vital: community. You hesitate at the door as a man exits, adjusting his coat and nodding at you in a friendly, if exhausted, way. You decide to look inside. The keeper, a round woman with kind eyes and a towel over her shoulder, greets you with a nod. She shows you the space: a big common room with low ceilings, lanterns flickering weakly, and rows of bunks stacked 2 or 3 high. You hear light snoring from someone already asleep at only 5 p.m. Impressive, honestly. Sleeping early in Victorian London is like achieving inner peace. You grab it whenever you can. You consider staying. It's cheap, relatively safe, and warm. On the downside, the man in the corner is brushing his hair with a fork. But honestly, maybe he's onto something. You thank the keeper and tell her you might return later. Back outside, you continue the hunt. The streets grow narrower as the fog rolls back in, turning the lamps into yellow halos. You inhale the damp air and remind yourself that comfort is not the goal tonight, survival is. You pass under a railway bridge where a few men shelter from the drizzle, stacking crates to sit on. They wave, offering to share the dry spot if you like. You smile but keep moving. You want something with at least a semblance of a mattress. Your next stop is a row of furnished rooms to let, where each house advertises lodgings for single occupants. You peek inside one of them and find a room barely big enough to hold its narrow bed, tiny table, and basin. The wallpaper curls at the edges, and you suspect the floor slopes slightly, but it's private. Privacy in Victorian London is like gold, rare and often out of reach. The landlady quotes a price that's just on the edge of what you can manage. You tell her you'll think about it, though she gives you the kind of look that says she's already guessed you're not committing. You keep walking, partly to explore, partly because your legs have accepted that strolling through fog is your new lifestyle. You pass a church offering shelter in its vestibule, charity for the desperate. A few people huddle there, wrapped in blankets, speaking softly. You pause, feeling the pull of the warm lamp inside, but you decide you still want to see what else the city offers. Further along, you stumble upon one of the more unusual lodging options, the workhouse. From the outside, it looks solid, imposing, and vaguely offended by your presence. This building is London's answer to the question, what if we made poverty bureaucratic and depressing? You stand at its iron gates, noting the high walls and stern design. A mainstream historical fact: workhouses provided shelter and food, but required strict labor in exchange. A quirky tidbit: some workhouses separated families upon entry, a rule that made many Londoners choose homelessness over institutional beds. You shake your head. Not tonight. Definitely not tonight. So you continue, footsteps tapping through puddles that reflect dim street lamps like tiny yellow moons. You pass a pub with laughter spilling out onto the street. Warmth radiates from the doorway, and you take one hopeful step toward it until you remember you're supposed to save your pennies for shelter, not lukewarm ale. You sigh dramatically, just a little joke for yourself, and keep walking. Eventually, you return to the first lodging house you visited, the one run by the unimpressed woman. This time, the place feels less overwhelming. The beds are close, sure, but they're real. The air is stale, yes, but also warmer than the outdoors. And perhaps most importantly, everyone here is in the same boat. Tired, worn out, and looking for a place to collapse. You pay the 4 pence and choose a bed near the wall. The mattress feels lumpy, the blanket scratchy, and the pillow suspiciously crunchy. But you know what? It's a bed, an actual bed. You stretch out, listening to the murmured conversations around you, someone recounting their day at the docks, another whispering a song to himself, a third debating whether the fog smells worse this week. You let the sounds wash over you like a strange lullaby. London hums outside the thin walls. Horses, voices, cartwheels, distant laughter. You're not entirely comfortable, not entirely safe, and not entirely confident in your life choices. But for tonight, you have shelter. You made it through your first day. And in Victorian London, that's something worth celebrating. You wake to the sound of boots hitting the floorboards and someone coughing in that deep, rattling Victorian way that makes you instinctively scoot a little farther from the edge of your mattress. Morning light slips through the thin curtains like it's trying not to disturb anyone, and the room smells faintly of damp wool and determination. You sit up slowly, stretch your shoulders, and realize you've survived your first night in Victorian London. Congratulations! According to some grim statistics of the era, that alone gives you bragging rights. You gather your things, nod politely to your fellow lodgers, and step out into the chilly morning. The fog is lighter today, drifting lazily across the cobblestones like it hasn't had its tea yet. You take a deep breath of what counts as fresh air in 19th century London and begin your next survival task, learning the streets. At first, London feels like a maze someone designed after staying awake for 48 hours on a diet of tea and despair. Major avenues spill into narrow alleys, and those alleys twist into unexpected courtyards, dead ends, and shortcuts that all seem to smell faintly of fish. The city has grown so quickly that its layout resembles several different eras awkwardly merged together, like a scrapbook that refuses to commit to one theme. Historians still argue whether London's chaotic street plan was intentional or simply a product of enthusiastic city expansion fueled by industrial optimism and zero urban planning. Big landmarks. The river is your anchor, broad, murky, and somehow always giving the impression that it's judging you. When you see the Thames, you know where you are in the grand scheme of things. Somewhere near fish markets, boatmen shouting insults with the precision of poets, and a smell that politely suggests you move along. A mainstream historical fact. Before major sewage reforms, the Thames was infamous for pollution, to the point that lawmakers fled from Parliament during the Great Stink. A quirky tidbit? Some Victorians claimed the river's smell cured headaches because it made stronger sensations impossible. Science was creative back then. You follow the river for a while, learning which piers lead to bustling markets and which lead to shadier areas where men in long coats exchange packages with the subtlety of squirrels stealing bread. You keep to the safer paths for now, though safe is generous. But you quickly see why knowing the streets is vital. London can swallow you whole if you wander without purpose. You leave the river and wander into a bustling market district. Shopkeepers are setting up stalls, banging crates open, arranging vegetables, shouting prices, and loudly insisting their goods are fresher than the competitors 3 feet away. One man proudly displays a cabbage as if it's a newborn child. You nod respectfully. He looks very attached. Here, you start to recognize the rhythm of the city. Fast, loud, and sprinkled with good-natured sarcasm. You pick up on subtle street skills. How to sidestep a cart without stepping into something organic. How to blend into crowds without looking lost. And how to avoid making eye contact with someone aggressively selling questionable meat pies. As you walk, you notice the city's unique architecture. Narrow medieval alleyways spilling into wide Georgian squares. then abruptly narrowing again into corridors barely wide enough for a human and their questionable life choices. You duck into one such alley where washing lines hang overhead like festive bunting celebrating Laundry Day. Water drips onto your shoulder, and you pretend not to care. You're adapting. You soon learn that some alleys serve as shortcuts, secret paths known only to locals, chimney sweeps, and cats with deep personal goals. One such route takes you behind a row of shops, past a door where someone is loudly practicing the flute, poorly, very poorly, and out onto a street filled with barrows of fruit and bread. You make a mental note. Alley with bad flute equals bread. Helpful. A costermonger calls out to you, offering apples at a discount. You decline politely but admire his enthusiasm. He immediately pivots to shouting about oranges straight from the docks, which you suspect is only partially true. But his energy is impressive. London thrives on it. As you continue wandering, you encounter one of the city's horse-drawn omnibuses rumbling past, passengers packed inside like determined sardines. You watch how people hop on and off while it's barely slowing down. You'll file that away under things you are absolutely not trying today. You'll master the streets one step at a time, not by leaping onto moving vehicles like a Victorian action hero. Still, you're getting the hang of it. You learn that shops with clean windows and trimmed awnings mark wealthier areas, places where people glance at you as if you've tracked in the fog. Meanwhile, streets with more chimneys than sky belong to the working classes, where the smell of coal and warm bread mingle in a strangely comforting way. You drift through both worlds, mapping them in your mind. Eventually, you decide to brave the famous 7 dials, a dizzying convergence of 7 streets that all look vaguely the same. People warn newcomers about this place. You go in, you come out confused. You step into the center, spin lightly to get your bearings, and immediately understand the chaos. Every street offers something different. Pubs, tailors, boarding houses, pawn shops, and an elderly man selling buttons from a coat pocket. You try not to get turned around, but Victorian London seems to enjoy testing you. It's nothing personal, the city just has a personality. You move on, heading toward Covent Garden. Here, street performers, florists, and market stalls create a vibrant scene. A man on stilts waves cheerfully. A woman sells violets from a basket, and the scent briefly cuts through the lingering fog. You buy one for a penny, not because you need it, but because you appreciate the tiny moment of beauty. Then you reach the quieter lanes, side streets, where everything slows down. Here, the city feels gentler, more lived in. You pass rows of townhouses, their iron railings slick with dew. A cat lounges on a doorstep, clearly unimpressed by human busyness. It allows you to admire it from a respectful distance, which is the closest thing to Victorian affection you'll get from a stranger's cat. As you walk, you start recognizing landmarks: the bakery with the lopsided sign, the pub whose door squeaks dramatically, the alley where a man sells second-hand books stacked in teetering piles. You pick up a map from him, more decorative than accurate, but charming. He tells you the map is mostly correct, which is Victorian code for good luck. You thank him anyway. By midday, you've learned several crucial things about navigating London. If the fog thickens suddenly, follow the sound of horses. Major streets are near them. If someone yells, "Make way," assume they're pushing a very heavy cart. Move. If you smell bread, turn toward it. Bread means people, and people mean oriented streets. If you smell something else, maybe rethink your current direction. And slowly, you begin to feel it, that sense of belonging, of recognizing the rhythm under the noise. You turn corners without hesitation, weave through crowds with ease, and trust your instincts in choosing safer paths. You're learning not just the streets, but the heartbeat of the city. London might be unpredictable, loud, and occasionally smelly, but today you start to understand its patterns. You start to blend in. You start to feel like someone who belongs here. And in Victorian London, that might be the greatest survival skill of all. You leave the quieter lanes behind and step back into the living and occasionally wheezing thrum of Victorian London. By now, you've learned of enough streets not to spin in confused circles, which means you've reached the next milestone in your survival journey, mastering the everyday skills that locals use without thinking. Skills you'll need if you want to last more than a week here. Think of this part as the Victorian tutorial menu, minus the pop-ups. You begin with the most important rule: blend in. Londoners are friendly enough, but the quickest way to attract pickpockets, curious constables, or overly enthusiastic street preachers is by looking lost. So, you straighten your posture, adjust your coat, and adopt the universal Victorian expression of, "Yes, I know exactly where I'm going, please do not approach me." You practice walking with purpose, even if that purpose is simply toward the bakery because it smells like hope. A horse-drawn cart rattles past, and you instinctively step aside just in time to avoid getting splashed by a puddle containing water, mud, and possibly several existential regrets. A mainstream historical fact: London streets in the 1800s were often coated with several tons of horse manure per day, so stepping carefully wasn't optional. A quirky tidbit: some Victorian entrepreneurs actually collected and sold the manure as fertilizer, though you're not planning a career shift in that direction. Still, it's good to know that even then, someone found a way to monetize the mess. Your next survival skill comes from watching a group of costermongers arrange their barrows of fruit with the precision of battlefield generals. They move confidently, shouting prices with that signature mix of friendliness and threat that makes customers feel both welcomed and warned. You observe how they bargain, never with desperation, always with lively banter. When one man tries to haggle too aggressively, the vendor simply snorts and says, "Sir, at that price, you'll get dreams, not apples." You store this line away for future use. Inspired, you practice your bargaining voice under your breath. Soft enough not to draw attention, strong enough to look like you know the hidden market codes. You even try a dry joke in the mirror of a shop window just to see if it fits your Victorian persona. It does. You're officially blending in. You mosey further down the market lane and catch the attention of a woman selling ribbons and sewing needles. She explains, at rapid speed, that you must always check the weight of fabric before buying it, because some merchants dampen cloth with water to make it feel heavier and more expensive. You thank her, grateful for the advice, even though the most sewing you'll do here is probably reattaching a button with the determination of a sleep-deprived tailor. London survival also requires an understanding of personal space, or rather, the lack thereof. Crowds move like schools of fish, and squeezing between people becomes an art form. You sidestep, weave, and adjust your pace until you realize you're doing it smoothly, without bumping into anyone. Except one man who stops abruptly to sneeze, but that hardly counts. As you continue walking, you encounter a group of chimney sweeps perched on a stoop. Their faces are a patchwork of soot and mischief. One of them, barely older than 12, grins at you and says, "Mind your hat, governor. Wind'll take it right off." You thank him, placing a hand on your brim. He returns to his conversation, which seems to involve daring someone to climb a drain pipe for fun. You decide not to judge. You've done weirder things when bored. You make your way toward a busier street where carriages, carts, and omnibuses create a symphony of clattering chaos. You practice crossing the road again. Step forward, gauge cart speed, avoid eye contact with annoyed drivers, and do not hesitate. Hesitation is how a Londoner ends up wearing muddy wheel patterns on their coat. By the third attempt, you move confidently enough that even the horses seem impressed. One of them snorts approvingly, or maybe that's just the normal horse sound, but you accept the compliment. You duck into a small shop selling everyday necessities: matches, soap, combs, and mysterious bottles with labels that promise everything from shiny hair to eternal youth. A mainstream historical fact: Victorians adored miracle cures, even when those cures contained alarming amounts of alcohol or questionable herbs. A quirky tidbit, some beauty tonics advertised glowing complexions because they had small amounts of arsenic in them. You decide not to purchase anything that might make you glow in the dark. Back outside, you head toward the docks. The air changes, filled with the scent of tar, seaweed, and crates that have seen better days. Here, your skill becomes attentiveness. Ships unload goods from around the world, and the crowd is a mix of sailors, dock workers, merchants, and opportunists who move with uncanny stealth. You keep your hand near your pocket, not in a paranoid way, just in a "I appreciate my belongings and would like to keep them" kind of way. You also practice that subtle, polite elbow angle that Victorian Londoners used to discourage loiterers from getting too close. Nearby, a woman selling pastries calls out her famous offer: "Buy one, get crumbs free." You smile and buy a roll. It's warm, soft, and exactly what your stomach needed. As you eat, you notice two men arguing about whether the city will eventually replace horses with steam-powered wagons. Historians still argue whether such conversations were common or simply the dramatic flair of the era's more imaginative thinkers. You continue your walk, now focusing on environmental awareness, not the modern eco-friendly kind. Victorian environmental awareness means watching for falling soot, unstable scaffolding, and the occasional rooftop bucket. You pass under a building where workers repair chimneys, and one calls down, "Mind yourself, soot coming." You step aside right as a cloud of black dust falls like confetti from a party no one should ever host. You take a detour into a quieter neighborhood. Here, people sweep their stoops, children chase each other, and a cat sits on a low wall, refusing to move for anyone, not even you. You walk around it because domination is a myth. Cats rule all eras. As you go, you refine another crucial Victorian skill: reading people. Londoners communicate as much with posture as with words. A tight grip on a basket means "don't bump me." A quick glance over the shoulder means "pickpocket nearby." And the squared shoulders of a gentleman in a top hat mean "my coat cost more than your month's rent." You practice observing these subtle cues, adjusting your path without drawing attention. It makes you feel oddly powerful, like a fog-soaked detective, minus the magnifying glass. Eventually, you reach a small square where musicians play for coins. A violinist bows a gentle tune while a man beside him dances with joyful abandon. You drop a penny into their tin cup. The violinist nods gratefully. The dancer throws in a spin that nearly knocks off his hat. You smile. Moments like these remind you that London isn't only risk and grime, it's creativity, humor, and tiny bursts of warmth. You sit on a bench for a while, watching the city swirl around you. People flow past like water, each absorbed in their own lives. You take it in, the sounds, the scents, the energy, and realize that these skills, these small adjustments, these quiet observations are what keep you afloat. Surviving Victorian London isn't about brute strength. It's about rhythm, awareness, instinct, and the occasional cleverly dodged puddle. You stand and continue down the street, shoulders relaxed, steps confident. You're blending in now, not as a visitor, but as someone who understands the code. Someone who can navigate crowds, bargain for bread, and read danger in a glance. And just like that, you feel it, the city nodding in subtle approval. You're becoming one of its own. You step back out into the street, the air feeling a little colder now. Or maybe that's just the way your nerves prickle after absorbing an entire afternoon's worth of London etiquette. You walk with the same slightly hunched shoulders you've been practicing, as if keeping your hopes tucked under your coat will somehow keep the soot out of them. And as you move past a row of narrow brick fronts with their peeling paint and crooked doors, you begin to notice something you didn't fully appreciate before. Practically everyone here is hustling. Every doorway hides a scheme, every alley a survival strategy. And today, you're about to learn some of them, because Victorian London is basically the Olympics of side hustling, minus the medals and plus more sewage. Your stomach growls, reminding you of another pressing matter: food. Not grand meals like in the West End hotels, where oysters are still somehow cheaper than a taxi. No, you're chasing the basics. Cheap, questionable meals that keep you upright. You hover near a stall where a woman ladles thick, grayish stew into tin bowls. The smell is interpretive. Your brain cycles through possibilities. Beef? Turnip? Sadness? But eventually lands on the truth. You're probably looking at pea soup that contains neither pea nor soup. Still, people are slurping it down because, frankly, it's warm and won't kill you immediately. That's Victorian cuisine for you. A mainstream historical fact slips in easily here. Most working-class Londoners survived on bread, tea, and whatever street food they could afford, especially whelks, pies of doubtful origin, and the occasional fried fish wrapped in yesterday's newspaper. And yes, ink stains were just another spice. You hover near a fish seller, offering what he proudly calls fresh. You don't ask for clarification. The rule of thumb is simple. If it doesn't smell like it's plotting against you, you eat it. As you chew, slowly and suspiciously, you watch two boys your age huddled over something shiny. You inch closer, because curiosity is free, and discover they're playing a shell game, shuffling a pea beneath 3 walnut shells and daring passersby to bet on where it lands. This is your first taste of street grifting, and London is absolutely marinated in it. Everywhere you look, someone is conning, bartering, performing, or straight up pickpocketing. And everyone is convinced they're too smart to fall for it. Spoiler, they're not. You probably won't be either. A quirky tidbit slips into your stroll. One of the most common street jobs involved renting out pets. Yes, rats. People could hire a rat to place in their shop window to attract customers interested in rat catchers or terrier performances. The Victorians loved a good rat spectacle. Your modern brain may struggle to process this, but welcome to 19th century entertainment economics. You continue onward, brushing crumbs off your coat, trying to appear both alert and harmless, a delicate balance. Up ahead, a man in a tall hat bellows loudly that he can read your palm and reveal your destiny for the low price of a halfpenny. You entertain the idea for a moment, imagining him squinting, tracing the line on your hand, and muttering something like, "Oh dear, you should probably leave London immediately." Instead, you shake your head gently and step past, but not before giving a small smile. Surviving London means appreciating its eccentricities without letting them mug you. You feel eyes on you again, this time belonging to a pair of young flower girls positioned near a busy corner. Their voices are soft but practiced as they call out to men in nice coats, offering posies and tiny bouquets. It's a better gig than some, at least flowers are legal. But their skirts are tattered, and the thinness of their arms tells another story entirely. You notice one girl gives you a glance, quick, calculating, almost hopeful. She's sizing you up, wondering whether you're a buyer or just passing through. You give her the faintest nod, and she nods back, understanding. London is full of these brief exchanges, tiny solidarities between strangers who share the same difficult streets. As you continue, you notice a slight commotion near the curb. A crowd is gathered around a man sitting cross-legged on the pavement, performing a magic trick involving scarves, smoke, and a chicken that may or may not be alive. The audience is eating it up. To your left, a gentleman mutters to no one in particular. Historians still argue whether these street conjurers learned tricks from traveling Romani performers or simply invented them in gin-soaked fits. You nod politely, because Victorian London is also packed with unsolicited opinions, and sometimes the best response is to smile and keep walking. A boy barrels past you suddenly, shouting triumphantly. Behind him, a red-faced man yells, "Stop! Thief!" Instinctively, you move out of the way. You're not getting involved in that. You barely know how to survive lunch, let alone amateur crime fighting. The boy vanishes around a corner with the speed of someone who has absolutely rehearsed this exact route, and honestly, you're impressed. To distract yourself from the potential moral dilemma, you drift toward a baker's stall. The warmth radiates outward in glorious waves, and before you can think too hard, you buy a small roll. It's hard as optimism in February, but edible, mostly. Between bites, you overhear a woman advertising employment opportunities, sewing work paid by the piece. You imagine long hours in cramped rooms, your fingers pricked raw, your eyesight fading. You silently promise yourself you'll avoid factory or workshop work if at all possible. Your spine hurts enough from just existing. A little further on, you pass a blind fiddler playing a mournful tune that arcs above the rumble of wheels and clatter of voices. His cup collects pennies from sympathetic passers-by. You drop your last halfpenny in because his playing touches something quiet inside you. That, and because generosity feels like a luxury you can still afford in tiny doses. But your mood shifts when you spot a cluster of people gathered around something hanging from a post. You brace yourself. Victorian London loves public displays of questionable taste. And indeed, you see handbills advertising an upcoming performance featuring a mermaid. You know better. It's almost certainly a monkey torso sewn onto a fishtail, the same sort of oddity people once paid full price to see in curiosity exhibitions. You shake your head with a little laugh. You can't decide whether people are easily fooled or simply enjoy being fooled. Probably both. Your day continues like this, a blend of near misses, minor surprises, and quiet calculations. Every corner offers temptation or trouble, usually both. And you're learning quickly that the real trick to surviving Victorian London isn't brute strength, or wealth, or even luck. It's paying attention, watching what others do, reading situations before they read you, and remembering that everyone here has a hustle, visible or hidden. You take one last slow breath, letting the murky London air settle into your lungs as gently as it can, which is to say, not gently at all. But there's comfort in knowing you're adjusting. You're learning the rhythm of the streets, the unwritten rules, the odd joys and stranger dangers. And with every careful step, you're becoming a little more London, a little less lost. You glance down at your scuffed shoes, then back up toward the hazy sky. The day is far from over, and the city still has more lessons waiting for you. For now, though, you've made it through another crowded stretch without being swindled, robbed, or emotionally defeated by soup. That's progress. You lean against a soot-darkened brick wall for a moment, letting your feet rest and your breath catch up. The streets are quieter here, though not exactly peaceful, just less crowded, less frantic. You've wandered into one of those in-between districts where working folk live stacked in narrow rows of tight, crooked houses. And now you're about to learn what home actually means in Victorian London. Spoiler, brace yourself. The word home is doing a lot of heavy lifting in this era. You start walking again, moving deeper into a lane so narrow you could probably touch both sides if you stretched your arms out. Laundry hangs overhead like pale flags of surrender, dripping on you at inconvenient intervals. You dodge a falling droplet that suspiciously resembles soapy water, or maybe it's just London being London. You give the damp fabric a cautious look and keep going, telling yourself that in the grand hierarchy of things that can fall on you here, laundry water is practically a blessing. Up ahead, a woman pushes open a door and tosses a bucket's worth of something onto the cobbles. You instinctively leap aside. Your survival instincts are getting much sharper, and honestly, you should be proud. She doesn't even look at you, just mutters about needing to get back to work before the landlord comes knocking. You nod to yourself. This is what you're here to learn. The relentless, exhausting routines of ordinary people just trying to stay afloat. You approach a building where an older man is struggling with the door latch. He gives you a friendly grunt and gestures for you to follow him in. Somehow, you do. Maybe it's curiosity, maybe it's the promise of warmth, or maybe it's the unspoken Victorian rule that when someone offers shelter, you take it and hope the floor doesn't collapse. Inside is a dim hallway with peeling wallpaper that might have once been floral, but now resembles a botanical crime scene. The smell is a combination of boiled onions, damp wool, and life. A lot of life. You step carefully as the floorboards groan with every footfall, like they're sharing their complaints with anyone who listen. The old man leads you into a shared kitchen area, if kitchen is the right word. There's a single smoky fireplace, a table that's definitely older than the concept of modern hygiene, and 3 families' worth of belongings tucked in corners. The warmth is thin, but better than outside. You take it in with a quiet, respectful nod. He points upward and explains, in a voice heavy with experience, that all the rooms above are rented by families, lodgers, or both. A mainstream historical fact slips gently into the scene. In Victorian London, it was extremely common for working-class families to live in single rooms, sometimes packed with 6, 8, or even 10 people. Privacy was a rumor, personal space a fantasy. As you climb the stairs, each one squeaking like it's tattling on you, you see doors left slightly ajar. In one room, a woman bends over a wash tub, arms reddened and raw. 2 small children sit nearby, playing with wooden spools because toys cost money they don't have. The woman meets your eyes for a moment, offers a tired but sincere smile, then goes back to scrubbing. You nod back, quietly acknowledging her endurance. Further down, you pass a room where 2 tailors share a single candle while sewing by hand. Their fingers move with a rhythm that seems born of necessity, not passion. You overhear one quietly say, "Historians still argue whether the long hours or the cold were worse." You can't tell if it's a joke or a complaint, probably both. You give them a soft greeting and keep walking. You reach the 3rd floor, where the hallway is even narrower. Here you hear coughing, deep, persistent, unsettling. A door opens just enough for a pale face to appear, eyes tired but polite. They glance at you, then quickly retreat. You gently exhale. You can feel the fragility of people's health here, like the entire building is held together by hope and thin plaster. And yes, you recall that one of Victorian London's many public health quirks was the belief that opening windows invited disease rather than prevented it. So rooms stayed closed, damp and stagnant, because that felt safer. You shake your head with quiet sympathy. At the far end of the corridor, you find an unoccupied room. Unoccupied, meaning that only 1 person lives here instead of 7. The door stands open, so you step inside cautiously. It's about the size of a modern closet, if the closet also had a fireplace, a straw mattress, and wallpaper peeling off like it's trying to escape. You run your finger across the mantel and feel grit, fine soot that settles everywhere, no matter what anyone does. A quirky tidbit surfaces as you look around. Some lodgers rented the space between beds, meaning they slept sitting upright, wedged between someone else's mattress and the wall. It was called perching, and yes, somehow it was cheaper than lying down. You take a breath and decide not to imagine that position for too long. Your back hurts just thinking about it. You sit gently on the edge of the straw mattress, which crackles like it's full of secrets. You test your weight, then slowly lean back until you're looking up at the water-stained ceiling. You imagine what it feels like to end each day in a room like this. Your only sanctuary, your only place to breathe. The thought softens you, it humbles you, it changes you. Through thin walls, you hear conversations blending. A mother telling her child a story about heroes who live far away from smoky chimneys. A man practicing lines from a play he'll probably never get to perform on a real stage. A pair of friends laughing about something small but genuine. It's strange, but comforting. Even in cramped, imperfect spaces, people find moments of humanity, tiny pockets of warmth in a cold city. You rise and move back downstairs. In the kitchen, a woman offers you a small cup of tea. Weak, pale, more hot water than tea, but it's a kindness. You accept it with both hands. As you sip, you feel it spread a thin ribbon of warmth through your chest. It's enough. One man nearby jokes about how, if you can sleep through the sound of rats in the walls, you're ready for anything. You laugh softly, because what else can you do? Another tells you that the trick to renting here is paying the landlord before he starts making threats about new tenants waiting. You nod gravely, as if you too are a seasoned expert in dodging overdue rent with pure charisma. And all the while, you observe, you absorb, and you adjust. Living conditions in Victorian London aren't glamorous, but they're real, and they teach you that survival is less about comfort and more about community, endurance, and small mercies that make the days bearable. When you finally step back outside, the sky is shifting into a hazy late afternoon gray. You take in a deep breath, carefully, gently, and let yourself feel grounded. You've seen where people sleep, where they eat, where they stitch their dreams together one threadbare day at a time. And now you're walking forward with a deeper understanding of the city's hidden heartbeat. Your journey continues, and the streets are waiting. You drift away from the cramped tenements with a new awareness of how the city breathes, slow and uneven, like a giant machine made from brick, fog, and human worry. As you step back onto the main road, you hear a peculiar rhythm rising above the usual rattle of carts and chatter. It's the sharp, almost musical snap of a wooden clapper. You turn your head and see a man in a threadbare coat swinging a device that looks like a cross between a child's toy and an alarm clock from the underworld. "Night soil cart coming through," he shouts, even though it's obviously not night yet. He shoots you a proud grin as he lumbers past with a wheelbarrow that you will absolutely not look into. You get the sense that he's one of the few Londoners who enjoys his job, possibly because he knows you'd never dare do it yourself. You step politely out of the way and consider this your unofficial introduction to Victorian sanitation. You continue down the street, taking in the smells, some recognizable, many not, one that might be cabbage or despair. And then you notice the gutters. The city still hasn't sorted out proper sewer systems for the poorest districts, so waste trickles along the curbs, following gravity like a sad parade. A mainstream historical fact slips right in. Before London's major sewer overhaul in the mid-19th century, much of the waste simply ran through open drains or was tossed directly into the streets. You reflexively pull your coat closer, as if that will shield you from olfactory harm. Near a water pump, a line of women stand patiently with metal pails, chatting in low, amiable voices. You approach, curious, and watch as each woman fills her bucket, sniffs it suspiciously, shrugs, and walks away. You're about to do the same when an older woman gives you a look that is equal parts warning and pity. "That pump's safe enough," she mutters, though historians still argue whether the one 3 streets over is the one that caused the cholera mess. She gives a little shudder, then waves you along. You decide to skip the water. You're hydrated enough. Probably. A few blocks later, you come upon something odd. A row of public baths. Not fancy, marble-tiled havens of luxury. No, these are plain brick buildings with steam leaking out of cracks and a wooden sign that reads, "Wash, 2 pence. Bathe, 4 pence. Towel, extra." You stare at the price list as if you're encountering a mystical relic. 4 pence for a bath? You think about the laundry water that dripped on you earlier and decide that maybe, just maybe, a bath wouldn't be the worst investment. You go inside, and a fog of warmth hits you instantly. A small miracle in a city where warmth is hoarded like treasure. A man behind a counter takes your coin and grunts as if it personally offended him. He hands you a key attached to a large wooden tag so heavy it could double as a weapon. You carry it down a corridor until you find your stall. Inside is a plain metal tub filled with water that could generously be described as lived in. You test the temperature with one finger. Warm, actually warm. You sink in cautiously, your body relaxing in increments, and for the first time in days, you feel cleanish. Clean adjacent. Clean enough that the universe gives you a polite nod. As you soak, you overhear conversations echoing from nearby stalls. Someone complains about the rising price of coal. Another describes an alarming encounter with a runaway horse. A third person insists they saw a ghost in the old brewery last week. though one skeptical voice counters that it was probably just a drunk man with a sheet over his head. You smile faintly. People have always been people. You finish your bath, dry off with what might be the world's stiffest towel, and step back onto the street feeling almost new. Almost. A quirky tidbit catches your attention as you walk. A man is sweeping the sidewalk with a peculiar broom made of bundled twigs and wire. He proudly tells passersby that he's a crossing sweeper, and it's his job to keep the street crossing clear so respectable folk don't ruin their shoes stepping in, everything. You spot his tip jar and drop in a penny. He beams and says, "May your boots never betray you." You take this blessing very seriously. Your improved mood is short-lived, however, because soon you encounter something you've been warned about, the dreaded miasma. Or rather, you meet a man wearing a small bottle of perfume tied around his neck, which he occasionally uncorks to inhale dramatically. He sees your puzzled expression and immediately launches into an explanation. "Bad smells cause illness," he tells you with great authority, tapping the bottle. "This here keeps death away." You nod politely, though inside you're thinking that the real danger is probably the extremely questionable street meat you ate earlier, but you keep that to yourself. You continue on until you reach a surprisingly long queue of people snaking around the corner of a small storefront. You ask someone near the back what they're waiting for, and the woman replies, "Laundry tokens." She explains that certain charitable institutions allow the poor to wash their clothes at a reduced rate, but only if they can secure a token. You notice the way she clutches her basket tightly, knuckles white with determination. Clean clothes are social currency here, and she's not letting anyone cut ahead. As you watch her shuffle forward, something softens in you again. It's easy to joke about grime and stink, but for many, sanitation is a daily battle, a fight to maintain dignity in a place that keeps trying to erode it. You keep walking until the morning light dims, replaced by the gray-blue wash of late afternoon. The fog starts rolling in again, thick enough to give the world a blurry, dreamlike quality. Lamps glow hazy gold through the mist, casting halos on the pavement. You squint a little and swear the air moves differently now. Closer, heavier, almost whispering. A lamplighter appears beside you, climbing a small ladder with practiced grace. He lights the lantern with a long taper, then hops down and gives his ladder a little satisfied pat. You strike up a quiet conversation, and he tells you he walks miles each night, lighting hundreds of lamps before the city swallows itself in darkness. He admits that sometimes he talks to the lamps just to keep from going mad. You laugh softly, reassuring him that talking to inanimate objects is completely normal. You do it too, mostly with your laundry pile. He grins at you, and you part ways with a small wave. You walk on, the world shifting gradually from foggy gray to soft darkness. And as you look around, you realize something important. Sanitation here isn't just about cleanliness, it's about order, survival, pride. People cling to small routines, baths, sweeping, washing, not because the city makes it easy, but because it gives them the illusion of control in a place that often feels wild. You breathe in the cold air, feel it settle in your chest, and keep walking. The city is changing shape again, preparing you for whatever comes next. And you keep moving with it, step by careful step. You wander deeper into the dimming streets, the fog hugging your coat like a clingy acquaintance who doesn't understand personal boundaries. Lamps glow faintly overhead, turning the mist into swirling gold ribbons. This should feel cozy, even cinematic. It does not, because you are walking straight toward Victorian London nightlife, and nightlife here does not mean cocktails and soft jazz. No, it means shadows with jobs. The first thing that hits you is the sound. Not music, not yet, but a low murmur rising from the alleys, the kind of noise made by too many people trying to survive in the same small space. You take a slow breath and step into a wider street where suddenly everything feels different. The day workers vanish, the city's night shift emerges. A man in a bright red waistcoat stands boldly under a street lamp, calling out offers for tonics. His display looks like bottles salvaged from a shipwreck, each filled with suspiciously colored liquids. He shakes one and gives you a grin that's one tooth short of reassuring. "Cure's what ails ye, lad," he insists. "Coughs, colds, melancholy, heartbreak, priced by affliction." You politely decline, although you do admire the entrepreneurial spirit. The Victorians pioneered many things, including the art of selling hope in bottles. As you move on, you sense someone trailing you. Two someones, actually. You quicken your pace. They quicken theirs. You glance back. Two boys, maybe 12 or 13, moving with the quiet confidence of people who definitely know how to steal your possessions without breaking a sweat. You shift to the right side of the pavement, adopting the unspoken London rule of pretending you're not frightened. They pass you, one giving you a suspiciously charming smile. You pat your pockets afterward. Everything is still there. Barely. A mainstream historical fact slides easily into your thoughts. Victorian London had an entire ecosystem of street thieves, ranging from pickpockets to bumpers, who knocked targets into walls to stun them. Some children were trained from toddler age to break into houses through chimneys. You instinctively glance upward. A chimney crew could be climbing above you right now. You turn onto a smaller lane, and the noise shifts from murmuring to singing, or something like it. Up ahead glows a lantern shaped like a crescent moon, the sign of a local gin palace. Gin is the unofficial sponsor of Victorian London. Cheap, potent, and often mixed with things you should not, under any circumstances, ingest. You step inside anyway because you're trying to be immersive. Warmth slaps your face the moment you enter. Lamps reflect off walls lined with huge mirrors, meant to make the cramped room seem grander than it is. You approach the counter cautiously and order something the bartender calls Blue Ruin. You don't ask why it's blue. You take a sip. Regret arrives immediately. You cough, your throat burning through time and space. The bartender laughs. "First time, is it?" he asks. You nod, eyes watering. He pats your shoulder with the tenderness of someone who has witnessed many tourists nearly combust. A woman nearby raises her mug in your direction. "That one'll put hair on your soul," she says with a wink. You smile back, not entirely sure your soul wants that. You linger a few minutes, observing quietly. The gin palace is loud and chaotic, but oddly comforting. Everyone here is escaping something. Cold, hunger, loneliness, landlords. You feel an odd sense of belonging, even as your entire digestive system begs you to leave. You slip outside again, where the fog seems thicker and the night louder. That's when you meet them, the night workers of every kind. A group of costermongers push carts filled with fruit that definitely wasn't this bruised earlier. One man offers roasted chestnuts, and the smell lures you like a cartoon character floating toward a pie. You buy a small paper cone. They're warm and sweet, nearly perfect if you don't think too hard about how many hands touched them before yours. A quirky tidbit dances through your mind as you walk. Some Victorian workers sold glowworm lanterns, yes, actual jars filled with glowworms, to pedestrians who needed light at night. You look around for one, and sure enough, a boy approaches with a jar that looks like dim fairy dust. "Penny?" he offers. You decline because you're pretty sure the worms deserve a better life than this. You continue toward a busier street, lured by faint singing and laughter. Up ahead is a music hall, one of the city's most beloved nighttime escapes. The sign outside promises comedy, acrobatics, and a man who can imitate a train. You figure that's worth the price of admission alone. Inside, the hall is packed. People lean forward in wooden seats, all eyes on the brightly lit stage. A performer in a sparkly coat leaps across the boards, cracking jokes about Parliament that make half the room howl and the other half pretend they didn't laugh. You find a place to stand near the back. The room is alive, vibrant in a way most of Victorian London is not. The train imitating man takes the stage next, and, well, he is astonishingly committed. He whistles, chugs, and even puffs imaginary smoke. The audience loves it. You grin. warmth blooming in your chest. For a moment, you forget how heavy the city can be. Then you notice the shadows in the balcony. People who aren't laughing. People watching the crowd instead of the stage. Pickpockets? Police? Both? You suddenly understand something. In Victorian nightlife, entertainment and danger overlap constantly, like two songs playing at once. You slip back outside before the show ends, partly to beat the crowd, and partly because you don't want to find out who those balcony watchers are. The fog curls around you again, and you head toward another sound, steady, rhythmic, metallic. A man hammers horseshoes in a tiny forge that glows orange against the night. Sparks fly like feral fireflies. You stand mesmerized. He looks up briefly. "Nights when the real work happens," he says, wiping sweat from his brow. "Days too crowded, too many expectations." His words stay with you as you walk on, your boots tapping softly on the wet stones. Maybe that's the truth of Victorian London nightlife. It's where the city sheds its daytime stiffness and becomes something raw, real, unfiltered. But not everything in the night is lively. Some corners grow oddly silent. A cold hush falls as you pass a narrow alley, lit only by a thin sliver of moonlight. You freeze. A hunched figure stands by a wall, wearing a small brass badge. A constable. He lifts his lantern toward you, the light slicing through fog. "Best not wander too far," he warns in a low voice. "There's trouble tonight." You nod, swallowing gently. You ask what kind of trouble. He sighs. "Depends who you meet." Fair. You move along, sticking closer to lamp-lit paths. The sounds of the music hall fade, replaced by distant carts, muffled conversation, the faint clatter of carriage wheels on stone. And beneath it all, something else, a pulse. The pulse of a city alive because people refuse to give up. Because even in poverty, fog, grime, and danger, they still find ways to laugh, sing, work, and hope. You glance around, breathing in the heavy night air. Victorian London is not soft or gentle, but in its own crooked way, it is deeply alive. And somehow, that gives you strength. Your night isn't over yet. There's more to see, more to learn. The city is just beginning to unfurl its darker, stranger layers. And you step forward, ready, mostly. You push onward, boots scuffing over the dew-soaked boards of Billingsgate before the sun even thinks about climbing into the sky. It's barely morning, though morning is generous. Victorian time is more of a vague suggestion anyway, especially down at the docks, where the day doesn't begin so much as erupt. Fishmongers are already hollering as if volume alone could render their goods fresher, and you edge in carefully, trying to look like you belong. You probably don't, but that's all right. Half the people here don't belong either. They're just doing what you're doing, trying to weather another day in a city that asks a lot and gives very little back. A sour, sea-briny mist floats off the Thames as you make your way toward the warehouses where casual laborers gather. You're hoping for a job that doesn't require you to lose a limb or part of your hearing. Historians still argue whether casual dock work was the most dangerous form of Victorian employment or merely in the top 3. But honestly, one look at the cranes and slippery planks tells you the ranking hardly matters. Someone yells for volunteers to unload a cargo of Baltic timber, which sounds relatively harmless until you see the size of the logs. One wobble and you'd be flatter than a penny train souvenir, though those won't exist for another few decades. You inch back into the crowd, deciding maybe another opportunity will present itself. A foreman with a checklist strides past, and you give him your best, "I am absolutely a competent and trustworthy worker" nod. He does not care. But luck flickers your way anyway when he calls out for someone to haul crates of dried fruit. Raisins, much safer than timber unless you have a very specific grape allergy you've never discovered. You raise your hand, and suddenly you're drafted into a line of men trudging toward a stack of wooden crates that smell vaguely of sweetness and dust. One crate shifts in your arms, and you remind yourself this is fine, this is normal. This is the Victorian version of quiet quitting, which is just desperately hoping no one notices you can't lift above your pay grade. As you settle into the rhythm, the scene around you comes into focus. Boats bump against the wharf like restless animals. Sailors shout in a dozen accents, from Irish to Italian to Cockney so thick you wonder if it counts as a separate language. According to one mainstream historical fact, by the mid-1800s, London's docks were among the busiest in the world, handling more than half of Britain's imports. You can believe it. You've barely been here an hour and already feel like you've inhaled the collective scent of every maritime product on Earth, including a suspicious whiff of shark liver oil. If nothing else, it clears your sinuses. Over here, a couple of dock workers debating whether the new hydraulic cranes are gonna take everyone's livelihood. Historians still argue whether the introduction of these machines truly devastated manual labor long term. But right now, they seem like a gift. One massive claw lifts a pallet with effortless grace, while you wheeze through your third crate of raisins. You mumble something about automation being the curse of every age. Then remember you're supposed to be from this age, so you change it to, ah yes, newfangled contraptions, concerning. Perfectly convincing. During a short break you don't technically have permission to take, you wander toward a quieter edge of the docks. That's where you notice a massive iron contraption on the water, almost like a floating paddle wheel barge with steam chuffing steadily from its pipes. A worker tells you it's a dredger, used to scoop muck from the riverbed. Here comes your quirky tidbit. Dredger crews often pulled up not just mud and debris, but sometimes intact medieval artifacts, random animal skulls, and once, allegedly, a perfectly preserved wheel of cheese. No one ate it, which is the real miracle. You inch closer to the river to catch your breath, but the smell slaps you back to reality. The Thames of Victorian London is not a gentle river. It's more like a simmering, communal soup infused with the city's worst habits. Sewage flows freely, factory waste drifts in oily ribbons, and a bloated something, not dead, just extremely unbothered, surfaces briefly before sinking again. You take several steps back. You remind yourself, surviving Victorian London means maintaining a strong, do not look too closely at anything wet policy. A nearby fisherman is muttering about the drop in salmon catches. He swears the fish up and left the Thames out of disgust. You can't blame them. Historically, salmon did vanish from the river entirely for decades due to pollution, and you sympathize with their choice. If you had the option to migrate upstream, you would too. Lunch arrives not because you've earned it, but because someone yells, "Break!" loud enough to cause an instinctive herd response. You find yourself perched on a stack of crates, eating what passes for a meal. Half a roll, a wedge of questionable cheese, and something that might be an apple or might be a potato disguised as an apple. Still, after hours of carrying crates, it tastes fine. Better than fine even. Hunger is a powerful seasoning. One worker next to you tells a story between bites, something about a warehouse ghost who knocks over barrels at night. He swears the spirit is a drowned sailor who's still trying to offload his cargo. You nod politely, but internally you file this under quirky but also very believable given the creaking horror movie acoustics around here. Every now and then, Victorian London feels more supernatural than historical, and you're learning to just go with it. The afternoon drags along, the sun glimmering weakly through smog, making everything look vaguely sepia-toned, as if the whole world has been aged prematurely. You return to the raisins, your arms trembling, but you keep going. There's a rhythm to it, a weird meditative ebb and flow. Lift, shift, step, set down. You almost find it calming, until someone shouts and the entire line lurches because a crate has split open. Raisins cascade like tiny edible marbles across the dock. Men groan. Someone swears creatively. You carefully angle your feet to avoid stepping on the rolling fruit and becoming a workplace slapstick anecdote. As the day winds down, you notice the tide pulling out, exposing the muddy shore below. You watch a group of mudlarks, mostly children, searching for scrap metal and dropped coins. Here's a mainstream fact. Many mudlarks earned only a few pennies a day, barely enough to afford food. Yet they combed the banks tirelessly, driven by necessity. You feel a small twist in your chest, and to lighten the moment, your brain produces a random joke about Victorian beachcombing being way less glamorous than modern Instagram implies. Your employer for the day, who still hasn't asked your name, finally dismisses the crew. You receive your pay, a handful of coins that look smaller than they should. Maybe they are. Victorian wages are fickle creatures. Sometimes they seem to evaporate just by being held. You tuck them safely into your pocket, double knotting the string, because losing your daily wage at this stage would be an extremely on-brand Victorian misfortune. You step away from the docks, muscles aching, boots damp, pockets slightly heavier. The sky is dimming, streaked with purples and smoky oranges, and you realize you survived the most chaotic part of the city without being crushed by timber, swallowed by the Thames, or accidentally conscripted into a rowing crew. All in all, a very respectable accomplishment. As you make your way toward the narrow streets beyond the riverfront, you remind yourself that surviving Victorian London is less about bravery and more about cautious optimism, strategic avoidance, and occasionally pretending you know what you're doing. And today, you managed all three. The evening drifts over you like a gray blanket, heavy but strangely comforting, and the sounds of the docks fade behind you, replaced by the rhythmic shuffle of pedestrians and the occasional clatter of carriage wheels on uneven cobblestones. You notice immediately how different the city feels once the industrial bustle quiets down. Shadows lengthen in the narrow alleys, wrapping around street corners and lamplight pools, making everything seem slightly surreal. This is the side of Victorian London that thrives at twilight, the city of markets closing, taverns awakening, and 1,000 tiny trades buzzing quietly under gas lamps. You pass a small shop where the smell of burning tallow wafts through the cracked doorway. Inside, a man dips candles and hums softly, moving with the calm precision of someone whose life revolves around a repetitive but essential craft. You step closer to watch, entranced by the way molten wax drips and coils in delicate loops. A mainstream historical fact enters your thoughts. Candle making was an essential craft in Victorian London, especially before widespread electricity, and skilled chandlers often sold their goods far beyond the city. You can practically feel their steady hands shaping warmth into light. As you continue, your attention is caught by a narrow alley where the faint clinking of metal rings out. A man hunches over a small anvil, hammering out tiny horseshoes for miniature ponies or decorative purposes. You realize that almost every profession in this city, no matter how obscure, has a rhythm, a cadence, a sort of quiet dignity that gets swallowed by the roar of the main streets. You pause, soaking it in. This is part of surviving the city, learning to notice the patterns before they swallow you whole. A quirky tidbit drifts into your mind. Some lamplighters carried tiny bells on their belts, ringing softly as they walked the streets to warn blind pedestrians of their approach. You notice a lamplighter ahead, his lantern glowing faintly, and imagine him jingling bells, a human metronome keeping the city in order. You give him a small nod as you pass. He tips his hat in return, a silent acknowledgement of shared survival skills. The air grows colder as the fog thickens, settling over the cobblestones and creeping up your legs. You tuck your coat closer and remind yourself why attention to detail matters here. Every step, every glance matters in a city where fortunes and failures happen in the blink of an eye. You pass a group of chimney sweeps huddled around a small fire, brushes propped against the wall. Their faces are streaked with soot, yet their eyes gleam with the pride of their trade. Historians still argue whether children were worse off on the streets or in the factories, but neither seem to care for your nap. You smile softly, acknowledging that human suffering, resourcefulness, and humor are inseparable in this city. You move along the street toward a small tavern tucked under an archway, its sign swinging lazily in the evening breeze. The murmur of voices inside is comforting in its normalcy. You step in, drawn by warmth and the faint promise of conversation. Inside, the tavern is dimly lit, the wood darkened by decades of smoke, ale, and stories. Patrons sit on rickety chairs, sipping beer or gin, their faces glowing with reflected lamplight. The room smells faintly of hops, wood polish, and faintly of desperation, a heady mix that somehow feels alive. A woman behind the counter gives you a nod and slides a mug of weak ale across to you. You accept it, letting the warmth seep into your hands. As you sip, you notice a man in the corner teaching a young boy to play cribbage. The boy's fingers fumble with the cards, and the man laughs softly. You think about how tiny moments like this, quiet instruction, shared jokes, fleeting smiles, serve as the city's secret backbone. It's not wealth or grandeur that sustains London, it's these tiny acts of endurance and mentorship. Outside the tavern window, the street carries on in parallel rhythm. A street cleaner shuffles along, brooms scraping softly, moving debris from gutters to piles. You remember a quirky tidbit you read. Some Victorian street sweepers collected coins or small trinkets from debris and kept meticulous logs, almost like they were preparing for a treasure hunt no one else would ever see. You imagine the joy of discovering a small coin buried in grime, a minor victory that could brighten a whole week for someone scraping by. Further along, you spot a man balancing a tray of roasted chestnuts, selling them to pedestrians. He calls out, and the sound carries faintly over the fog. You pause, tempted, then remember your earlier adventures with questionable food and decide it's worth it this time. The chestnuts are warm, cracked open easily with your fingers, their faint sweetness and soft texture a small comfort against the chill settling into your bones. You savor each one slowly, mindful of survival tactics. Never underestimate the simple joys. Sometimes, these tiny victories, the warmth of food, the smell of candles, the glow of lamps, are what keep you moving through the endless gray of London. You move toward a quieter alley, careful to stay near the light. Children dart past, playing knock and run with whoever is unfortunate enough to be near, their laughter sharp and contagious. You smile, thinking how odd it is that life continues unabated despite all the noise, danger, and grime. Their resilience is infectious. And then you notice a man sitting against the wall, sketching furiously in a small notebook. He pauses occasionally, looks around, then scribbles again. You wonder what he sees in these streets that you don't. Historians still argue whether such urban sketches were primarily documentary or artistic exercises, but to you, they feel like tiny acts of preservation, of noticing the unnoticed. The fog thickens again as you leave the alley and return to the wider street. Gas lamps flicker like distant stars, casting moving shadows that dance along the buildings. A man carrying a wheelbarrow of coal approaches, his footsteps heavy, deliberate. He tips a nod to you, a silent recognition of your shared passage through the city. You realize that Victorian London is a complex choreography. Every person is both actor and audience, navigating survival while participating in an ongoing, unwritten play. You pass a public fountain where water drips steadily into a stone basin. Some passers-by stop briefly, cupping water into their hands. The sound is faint but grounding, a reminder that even in this dense, gray, chaotic city, there are constants, small points of quiet that anchor you. You touch the cool stone of the fountain, letting it remind you that even amidst unpredictability, there are still things to hold on to. A street musician begins to play a violin nearby, the soft notes floating above the hum of night commerce. The music is gentle, lilting, almost a whisper against the backdrop of the city's ceaseless life. You pause again, letting the melody seep into your bones, allowing it to momentarily overshadow the grime, the danger, the constant motion. Music, you realize, is one of London's survival strategies. It offers a sliver of calm, a reminder that even in struggle, there is art. As you continue along the street, you notice the small details that make the city live and breathe. The glint of metal from a lamplighter's lamp, the subtle sway of laundry overhead, the way fog seems to curl around lampposts as if listening. You inhale deeply, letting the scents, sounds, and shadows envelop you, imprinting them into memory. Survival in Victorian London isn't just physical, it's sensory. You need to read every flicker of light, every cough, every whisper of wind through the alleys. By the time you reach the far end of the street, your body aches pleasantly from hours of walking, observing, and minor exertion. You realize that in order to survive in this city, you've had to learn rhythm, timing, and patience. You've had to notice what others overlook, understand small mercies, and appreciate fleeting moments of warmth, sweetness, and laughter. The streets are alive with hidden lessons, and you've begun to absorb them, step by careful step. The fog swirls one last time as you look back over the street, and a thought strikes you. Surviving Victorian London isn't about avoiding the chaos entirely. It's about moving with it, understanding it, and finding your own small pockets of calm amid the ceaseless noise. The night stretches ahead, full of new streets, new challenges, and new rhythms, and you take a slow, steady breath, ready for whatever comes next. The night deepens, thickening around you like a woolen blanket that's both comforting and suffocating. Gas lamps cast golden halos in the fog, illuminating damp cobblestones slick from a light drizzle. You walk carefully, avoiding puddles that reflect the street like fractured mirrors. Each step is measured because, in Victorian London, one misstep can be inconvenient or much worse. Your boots squelch slightly as you pass a side street where a dog, ragged and thin, curls against a wall. It watches you with wary eyes, and you realize quickly that even the animals here have learned vigilance. The streets themselves tell stories. You notice a discarded wooden crate, half soaked in water, and for a moment it seems alive, as if the city is breathing through its litter. You bend down, test its weight with a cautious hand, and almost laugh at the thought that some enterprising street urchins might use it for a makeshift bed tonight. A mainstream historical fact floats into your mind. Many children in Victorian London, mudlarks, bootblacks, chimney sweeps, often had to improvise their sleeping arrangements nightly. Some slept in alleys, some under carts, and some in empty warehouses, always adapting to the city's rhythms and dangers. As you continue down the lane, a faint, acrid smell catches your attention. It is unmistakable. Smoke from countless fireplaces, blending with the tang of coal and the occasional whiff of something rotting. You sniff cautiously and remember that London's air quality was notoriously bad in the 19th century, especially in winter when households burned coal relentlessly. Historians still argue whether the long-term health effects were fully understood at the time, but the coughing you hear from nearby windows tells you enough. You tighten your scarf and press on, determined not to inhale too deeply. Your path takes you past a small cobbler's workshop. The warm glow from the tiny window spills onto the street, and you see the cobbler bending over a shoe, hammering nails with rhythmic precision. Sparks fly from the metal, tiny golden stars against the darkness. He doesn't notice you at first, focused entirely on his craft. A quirky tidbit drifts into your awareness. Some cobblers in London not only repaired shoes, but also acted as informal newsbrokers, offering gossip and letters in exchange for tips or small favors. You watch a customer slip in, exchange a whisper, and slip out, leaving the cobbler nodding knowingly. In this city, every trade has layers beyond its surface. A little further on, you encounter a group of costermongers packing up their stalls for the night. They chatter quietly about tomorrow's deliveries, the best fruit to sell, and the customers who never tip. You pause, noting how carefully they cover their goods, tying tarps over crates and baskets. You realize that surviving here isn't just about avoiding danger, it's about preparation, anticipation, and respect for the rhythm of commerce. These street sellers operate on instinct, honed by years of necessity. Your attention is drawn to a narrow passage where faint music drifts outward. You step closer and peek inside. A small assembly of musicians practicing in a dimly lit cellar. The violin sings softly, a cello hums an accompaniment, and a piano ticks quietly, almost reluctantly, under a gentle hand. The space is cramped but alive, full of energy despite its size. You think about the contrast between this room and the chaotic streets outside. Music here is more than art. It's a lifeline, a reminder of humanity amidst concrete, soot, and shadow. Suddenly, a loud crash echoes nearby. You jump and turn to see a stack of crates toppled over, sending apples rolling across the wet pavement. A man curses under his breath and begins picking them up. You help instinctively, realizing that sometimes survival requires small acts of participation and solidarity. A nearby observer nods in approval, their approval a quiet reinforcement that in this city, manners and help can be as important as vigilance. You continue on until you reach a public wash house, its doors open and lanterns glowing inside. Women and children move in and out, carrying baskets and buckets. The rhythmic splash of water is oddly soothing against the backdrop of uneven footsteps and distant shouts. Here, the ordinary becomes almost ceremonial. Soap lathers rise and fall, hands scrub against cloth, water runs and drips, and the city's grime is contested in small, deliberate motions. A mainstream historical fact surfaces. Public washhouses were a vital part of urban life, offering communal spaces for hygiene at a time when private bathing was a luxury. You watch for a moment, marveling at the choreography of survival and dignity in the midst of hardship. You step aside to allow a group of children to pass. They carry bundles of clothes, laughing softly, their bare feet slapping against the stone. One trips and nearly falls, but the others catch them quickly, teasing gently. You notice how even the youngest Londoners have learned careful balance, quick reflexes, and community awareness, skills that are essential in a city where danger and opportunity often intersect in unexpected ways. You recall a quirky detail. Some street children carried tiny charms or tokens for luck, believing these objects could protect them from misfortune. Perhaps a coin in a pocket, a small carved figure, or even a leaf pressed into a book. Every superstition was worth trying when survival depended on vigilance. You press on, moving past a row of shuttered shops and quiet alleyways. The fog thickens, curling around your ankles and carrying the distant sound of church bells. Their toll is slow, methodical, comforting in its consistency. You walk a little slower now, feeling the weight of the city settle on your shoulders. In the distance, you spot a faint glow, a single lamp outside a tavern that seems to promise warmth, camaraderie, and a brief respite from the damp chill. You approach cautiously, noting the laughter spilling out into the night. You are tempted, but you remind yourself that caution is key. Even temporary comfort comes with its own set of rules, often unspoken but understood by anyone who has spent a night wandering these streets. You step inside and find a room filled with quiet conversation, the soft clink of mugs, and the faint aroma of bread and stew. Patrons nod in acknowledgement as you pass, and you feel a momentary connection to the pulse of human endurance that flows quietly through the city. Survival in Victorian London, you realize, isn't just about avoiding hazards or seeking warmth. It's about noticing rhythms, understanding people, and finding small pockets of calm wherever they may appear. You take a seat near the back, allowing your body to rest while your mind continues to map the city. You observe the interplay of light and shadow, the subtle dance of movement and stillness, and the ways in which ordinary people carve out spaces for dignity and comfort despite the chaos surrounding them. You sip slowly from a cup of warm tea, letting the liquid remind you that small comforts are often the most valuable. As the evening stretches toward night, you step back outside. The fog has thickened further, and the streets are quieter now, carrying a soft hush that allows you to hear your own breathing, your own heartbeat as you move through the city. You realize that by paying attention, by respecting the rhythm of life and the fragility of survival, you have begun to understand the city not as a threat, but as a living entity, a mosaic of people, labor, danger, and fleeting beauty. And with that thought, you continue walking, ready for whatever lessons the night will teach next. The fog has thickened into a low, damp blanket that presses softly against your cheeks as you navigate the quieter streets of East London. Your footsteps echo off brick walls, each sound swallowed quickly by the persistent mist. You notice the subtle changes as you move farther from the bustling main roads. Fewer carriages, fewer hawkers, fewer city sounds, replaced by the occasional drip of water from gutter spouts and the distant crow of a stray rooster. Even the air smells different here, a mix of damp earth, coal smoke lingering from earlier fires, and something slightly metallic, perhaps from the dockyards or the countless forges tucked into hidden alleys. You breathe slowly, letting the city settle into your senses, realizing that survival here depends as much on patience and observation as on physical endurance. A group of chimney sweeps trudge past, their small frames hunched under heavy bundles of brushes. One of them pauses to offer you a shy grin, revealing soot-streaked teeth. You nod politely. Chimney sweeps were often children, some as young as 6, forced into labor by necessity. A mainstream historical fact comes to mind. Victorian authorities occasionally passed regulations to prevent the worst abuses, but enforcement was weak and children continued to work under dangerous conditions. You shiver slightly, imagining the narrow flues, the scraping soot, and the steady rhythm required to avoid injury or suffocation. In the alley nearby, a man tinkers with a small mechanical contraption that looks like a hybrid of a clock and a birdcage. He explains that it's a music box for children, a tiny escape from reality in the cramped tenements. You watch the delicate gears spin as he winds it up. A quirky tidbit surfaces. Some Victorian inventors would mail these intricate toys to relatives across the country, turning mechanical whimsy into a family correspondence of sound. You can almost hear the distant chime of one of these devices, tiny notes carried faintly on the evening wind. As you continue walking, you notice a faint glow in a narrow courtyard. Lanterns hang from hooks, flickering and casting elongated shadows across the walls. A small group of women is gathered around a wash basin, scrubbing clothes in rhythmic unison. You pause, observing how their hands move, fast, precise, experienced. They exchange quiet gossip and jokes, the sound soft and melodic against the backdrop of the fog. Historians still argue whether public laundries provided more opportunity or more oppression for working-class women. But it's clear these spaces are as much about survival and solidarity as hygiene. A curious smell draws your attention next. Roasted chestnuts, sweet and earthy, carried on the wind by a street vendor whose cart is balanced precariously on 2 spoked wheels. He calls out to passers-by, offering a warm snack for a penny or 2. You pause, buying a small paper cone, the warmth and taste a fleeting comfort against the damp chill. You realize that these small indulgences, snacks, warm hands, fleeting warmth, are essential tools in surviving the city's relentless grind. The alleys begin to twist and turn in confusing patterns, and you remind yourself of a quirky survival tactic. Always keep your left hand brushing the walls. It provides orientation when fog or darkness threatens to swallow familiar landmarks. As you move, you spot a small sign for a pawnbroker, its windows cluttered with curiosities, clocks missing hands, broken jewelry, and perhaps a shoe or 2. You wonder how many lives have intersected in this one shop, each item a story, a fragment of necessity or desperation. Pawnbrokers were often lifelines, lending small sums for immediate needs while collecting collateral that might carry personal history. A sudden clang echoes through the alley, startling a pair of cats that vanish into the shadows. You step lightly, realizing that the city operates on rhythms both seen and unseen. The clatter of a cart, the whisper of a door closing, the careful avoidance of someone else's misfortune. You think about the unseen dangers, thieves, drunken laborers, unstable scaffolding. But you also notice the beauty in the city's mechanics, the interplay of sound, shadow, and movement that keeps the streets alive even when empty. You round a corner and discover a small fountain, its stone edges slick with moss. A few people pause to drink, carefully cupping their hands. You do the same, feeling the cold water against your skin. There's something grounding in this, a reminder that even in the chaos, survival depends on these small, ordinary acts. A mainstream historical fact emerges. Public fountains were vital not just for drinking water, but for social cohesion, offering places where people exchanged news, gossip, and brief respite from labor. Nearby, a lamplighter methodically ascends a ladder, lighting each lamp with practiced ease. You watch, mesmerized by the flicker of flame catching in the glass. He tips his hat, acknowledging your silent admiration. The lamplighter's role is deceptively simple, yet essential, marking paths, warding off shadows, and maintaining a semblance of order in an otherwise chaotic environment. You remember a quirky anecdote. Some lamplighters carried small notebooks, cataloging which lamps flickered, which were broken, and even noting the comings and goings of suspicious characters, a private chronicle of nightly survival. As you move past the lamplighter, a faint melody drifts from an open window above. A violin plays, soft and hesitant, interrupted by the creak of floorboards. You linger, absorbing the notes, realizing that music in Victorian London is everywhere, sometimes hidden, sometimes public, but always present. Historians still argue whether street music was primarily for entertainment or for subtle psychological survival, but you feel certain it serves both purposes. Music softens the edges of a city that can otherwise feel unforgiving. You continue walking, taking care to notice the small details that might make or break survival, puddles that might hide loose stones, the subtle tilt of a doorway that could indicate a threshold to safety or danger, and the faint echoes of conversations that may or may not concern you. The city is alive in layers, each observation another tool in your unspoken survival kit. As midnight approaches, the streets quieten further. A single cart rolls past, squeaking on worn wheels. A cat slinks along the edge of a building, and somewhere a dog barks once before settling back into silence. You breathe deeply, feeling the cold air fill your lungs, noticing how your body has adapted to the subtle rhythms of this city. Surviving here is as much about learning the language of movement and sound as it is about avoiding harm. You pause to observe a group of children playing a quiet game of tag in a sheltered courtyard. They move with agile grace, laughter muffled but persistent. Some carry small charms or tokens for luck, a reminder that superstition and resourcefulness coexist in this environment. You smile faintly, realizing that adaptation and play are as vital for survival as vigilance and caution. The night seems to stretch endlessly, but you know that dawn will come, bringing new challenges and routines. For now, you walk on, letting the fog, the light, and the muted sounds of the city teach you their lessons. Every step, every observation, every small interaction is part of learning to move through Victorian London alive, aware, and just a little wiser. The early hours of the morning bring with them a stillness that is almost unnatural for Victorian London. The streets are quieter now, almost eerily so, with only the occasional cart creaking along the cobbles or a solitary figure passing in the fog. You trudge forward, your coat damp from the persistent mist, and take comfort in the rhythm of your own footsteps, the soft squelch of leather against wet stone, a reassuring companion. Survival at this hour requires calm awareness. The city sleeps uneasily, and the quiet can conceal as much danger as noise. You pass a small bakery, just beginning to fire its ovens. The scent of warm bread drifts into the street, rich and comforting against the damp chill. Bakers are already kneading dough, their arms dusted with flour as they work with meticulous care. A mainstream historical fact comes to mind. Bread was a staple of the Victorian diet, and bakeries often operated through the night to ensure fresh loaves were ready for the morning rush. You inhale deeply, savoring the aroma, and for a moment, the city feels less intimidating and more like a living organism, pulsing with quiet life. Turning a corner, you notice a cluster of night watchmen gathered near a lamppost. Their lanterns glow dimly, casting elongated shadows on the walls. They speak in hushed tones, eyes scanning the streets for signs of trouble. Historians still argue whether night watchmen were effective at preventing crime or merely symbolic, but you can see the care in their posture, the tension in their movements. Survival in Victorian London, you realize, often hinges on small interventions, someone paying attention when others do not. A quirky detail catches your eye nearby. A man balancing a small tray of fried eels, calling softly to passersby. The smell is strong, salty, and strangely enticing. Fried eel shops were a common sight along the Thames, a cheap and filling meal for laborers and night wanderers alike. You pause, imagining the odd combination of flavors, the sizzling oil and the bustling customers. For a moment, you almost forget the damp chill of the streets, caught up in the sensory history of the city. Moving on, you encounter a group of dock workers heading home after their night shifts. Their faces are lined with exhaustion, but carry a quiet satisfaction, the result of a night spent earning a wage in one of the world's busiest ports. You notice a young boy carrying a basket of oysters, carefully balanced as he walks beside an older man. The oysters glint in the lamplight, cold and briny. A mainstream historical fact, oyster consumption in Victorian London was extremely common, with cheap oysters feeding the working class and luxury oysters reserved for the wealthy. You marvel at the contrast, how one species of shellfish could symbolize both necessity and indulgence, survival and sophistication. As you continue, the fog thickens again, curling around your ankles and drifting up your legs. You spot a small forge tucked into an alleyway, where a blacksmith hammers a glowing piece of iron. Sparks fly like tiny fireflies, illuminating the rough lines of his face. You pause, appreciating the rhythm of his work, the way his hammer strikes with both precision and strength. A quirky tidbit comes to mind. Some blacksmiths in Victorian London also acted as informal fixers for the community, mending everything from wagon wheels to broken furniture, their skill extending beyond metal to practical problem solving. The streets begin to show signs of morning activity. Shop shutters lift, a grocer sweeps the steps of his store, and a few early commuters make their way to the train stations. You observe, quietly, noting how the city transitions from night to day, from mystery to mundane routine. Historians still argue whether this shift in rhythm was more dangerous than it was safe, as the mix of tired night laborers and early risers could create accidents or altercations. You step lightly, aware of each footfall, noticing the subtle cues that signal movement, behavior, and potential hazards. A narrow alley draws your attention. It is almost hidden, a slit between two buildings, but you notice a faint glow of candlelight through a small window. Inside, a seamstress bends over her work, stitching fabric with careful precision. You observe the tiny movements of her hands, the way her needle flicks in and out of the cloth, and the faint hum of her singing. A mainstream historical fact, seamstresses often worked long hours in poorly lit conditions, sometimes sharing cramped rooms with multiple workers, relying on both skill and endurance to make a living. You feel a small pang of empathy, recognizing the resilience required to survive through repetition, patience, and quiet determination. Continuing down the alley, you notice a group of children huddled around a barrel fire, their faces lit by the flickering orange glow. They share stories, jokes, and small scraps of food. A quirky detail emerges. Some children kept tiny, secret notebooks in which they recorded the events of their day as a form of private history or a secret game. You imagine the stories written in pencil, the sketches of street scenes, and the coded accounts of mischief and survival. It occurs to you that documenting life, even in miniature, is another form of enduring this city's relentless pace. You step back onto the main street, which is beginning to hum with morning traffic. Horses clip-clop over cobblestones, vendors shout their wares, and the fog begins to lift slightly, revealing the outlines of buildings that loom overhead like silent sentinels. You notice a man setting up a stall of newspapers, carefully arranging each sheet to catch the first readers of the day. Mainstream fact: newspapers were a crucial source of information for Victorians, with daily editions reporting everything from politics to petty crime. You observe how people crowd around, skimming headlines and exchanging brief comments, a subtle reminder that even amidst chaos, the city thrives on communication and awareness. A faint sound of bells rings from a nearby church, marking the hour. You pause, letting the tolls echo through the fog. The sound is both comforting and grounding, a steady cadence in an otherwise unpredictable environment. You notice a few early worshippers entering the building, their footsteps careful and deliberate. Historians still debate the role of religion in providing community support versus strict social control, but you sense that for many, these moments offer solace, routine, and guidance. Survival here is as much mental as it is physical, and the rhythm of worship, work, and social structure provides a scaffolding for endurance. Moving onward, you encounter a man pushing a cart filled with logs for fuel. He glances at you, nodding silently, and you respond in kind. Small gestures like this, acknowledgement, politeness, recognition, are tools of survival in a city where subtle social cues can prevent conflict or ease tension. You realize that reading the city is about noticing both the big and small, understanding how the rhythm of human behavior intersects with the geography, and anticipating hazards before they materialize. Finally, you arrive at a quiet courtyard where the air smells faintly of flowers, a rare oasis amidst the soot and grime. A few birds hop along the edges, unbothered by human activity, and a single lamp glows softly, illuminating the worn stone beneath it. You pause, letting the stillness wash over you. In this city of fog, noise, and relentless pace, moments of calm exist like hidden treasure, and recognizing them is essential to surviving not just the streets, but the weariness that accumulates with each passing hour. You continue walking slowly, mindful of the small lessons, the rhythms, the gestures, and the smells. Each step reinforces your growing understanding that survival in Victorian London is not simply about avoiding danger. It is about attuning yourself to the city's heartbeat, respecting its rhythms, and finding subtle sources of comfort amidst chaos. As dawn approaches, you feel a quiet confidence, a sense that the city, with all its contradictions, can be navigated safely if you move with care, awareness, and respect. The first hints of dawn bleed into the misty sky, pale streaks of pink and gold brushing over the rooftops, as if the city itself is stretching after a long night. You trudge along the narrow lanes of Whitechapel, boots echoing softly on uneven cobbles. The air is damp and faintly acrid, a mix of soot, coal smoke, and river mist. Even in these early hours, the city has begun to stir. The streets are no longer entirely empty. Merchants start opening shutters, the distant clip-clop of horse-drawn carts grows more insistent, and the occasional dog yips in the alleys. Survival at this hour requires patience, awareness, and a keen sense of timing. You've learned that the hard way. You pass a small butcher shop, just beginning to hang meat in the display windows. A thin layer of frost clings to the edges of the glass. The butcher, wiping his hands on a stained apron, nods at you without breaking stride. A mainstream historical fact surfaces. Victorian Londoners relied heavily on local butchers for fresh meat, though hygiene standards were often questionable, leading to occasional outbreaks of disease. You suppress a shiver, noting the care the butcher takes in arranging his goods. Every slice, every hanging joint, an unspoken promise of livelihood and survival. In some shops, particularly smaller stalls, it was common to display counterfeit items alongside genuine goods to test the sharpness of customers' eyes, almost like an early urban game of trust and deception. You imagine a passerby carefully inspecting sausages or apples, trying not to appear naive, while the shopkeeper smirks knowingly. You step lightly past, appreciating the subtle social cues and unwritten lessons embedded in everyday commerce. The streets grow busier now. Vendors begin setting up baskets of fruits, vegetables, and cheap trinkets, their voices rising to a melodic shout that cuts through the fog. You notice how quickly they interact with each other. Gestures, nods, and brief phrases convey more than words alone ever could. Survival here depends on reading these cues, understanding who is friend, who is competitor, and who will step aside or step in. Historians still argue whether street markets were chaotic hubs of opportunity or dangerous pressure points, but for you, they represent both, a necessary theater of vigilance and adaptation. A narrow alley to your left emits the faint smell of coffee and pastries. You follow it for a few paces and find a small cafe preparing for its first customers. A woman stirs a large pot of steaming liquid while a man slides freshly baked rolls onto a wooden counter. You pause, inhaling the warmth and comfort of the aroma. Food at this hour is both a sustenance and a subtle reminder that human routines create predictable patterns, a survival advantage if you know where to find them. Moving onward, you pass a row of tenement houses, their windows fogged over from early cooking fires. A child leans out of one, waving to a passerby before retreating quickly as a parent calls them inside. Mainstream historical fact: many working-class families lived in cramped, multi-story dwellings with shared water sources and minimal ventilation, which fostered both communal resilience and challenges of hygiene and disease. You note how the city's architecture shapes behavior, forcing small adaptations, improvisations, and quiet compromises every day. A quirky detail emerges. Some families would place tiny shoes or trinkets in windows as subtle signals to neighbors, a kind of visual shorthand indicating a new birth, a visit from a friend, or simply a reminder that someone was home. You smile at the ingenuity, realizing that these small gestures form the undercurrent of social survival, often unnoticed by outsiders, but vital to those living within the rhythm of the streets. The hum of commerce grows louder as more vendors set up stalls, their voices blending into a soft, constant murmur that blankets the city in rhythm. You pass a fishmonger displaying glistening cod and mackerel, and notice a small crowd already gathering. You recall a mainstream historical fact: fishmongers often sold leftovers at reduced prices near closing time, a form of survival both for the merchant and the consumer. You tuck the information away as a mental note. Small economies like these can keep both body and wallet nourished. You continue down a slightly wider street where the occasional carriage rattles past. The drivers shout greetings, gestures flaring like punctuation marks against the morning haze. A street sweeper, broom in hand, sweeps with deliberate precision, collecting debris that has accumulated overnight. The rhythm of movement, noise, and human effort is almost hypnotic. Historians still debate whether this constant labor was primarily a civic improvement or a mechanism of control, but in practical terms, it shapes survival. Knowing when and where labor occurs can prevent mishaps or missteps in the city's flow. Turning a corner, you find a small public water pump in a cobblestone square. People queue quietly, buckets clanking, exchanging brief words. You step forward, fill your own bucket, and notice the subtle economy of social interaction. Who yields, who waits, who exchanges a brief nod of acknowledgement. These small acts are survival mechanisms, delicate negotiations that maintain peace and predictability. A quirky detail: some residents would secretly mark the pump with chalk, indicating which times of day had the freshest water, a subtle map of urban wisdom. A faint melody drifts from a nearby window, a piano or perhaps a harpsichord, playing slowly in an uneven rhythm. You pause, listening. Music in Victorian London, you reflect, often served as an anchor amidst chaos, a reminder that even in the densest, dirtiest streets, there is culture, artistry, and human resilience. The scholar in you notes that historians still argue whether music was more a distraction from hardship or a reinforcement of community cohesion, but in this moment, it is a small sanctuary for the ears and soul. Continuing, the market square opens up before you. Stalls, carts, and pedestrians mingle, the fog lifting gradually in the early sunlight. You walk among them, careful to observe subtle cues: who moves where, how vendors interact with customers, and where opportunities for safety or sustenance might lie. The city's pulse is now evident, a steady, predictable rhythm that has emerged from the chaos of night, the danger of the docks, and the vigilance of countless early risers. A lamplighter extinguishes the remaining gas lamps, their flames guttering softly. He pauses briefly, nodding to you, an acknowledgement of shared space and survival. You return the nod, recognizing that in a city like this, even minor gestures carry significance. Survival is as much about understanding social contracts as it is about physical endurance. Finally, you find a quiet spot at the edge of the market, leaning against a stone wall, letting the city's rhythm wash over you. You breathe in the sense of bread, coal, fish, and damp stone, and realize that every sound, every movement, every small interaction is a layer of knowledge, a lesson in endurance, and a tool for navigating this complex urban organism. Dawn has arrived, carrying with it warmth, light, and the promise of a new day. Yet the lessons of the night linger. As you prepare to move on, you understand that surviving Victorian London is not a single feat accomplished once, but a continuous practice of attention, patience, and adaptation. The streets, alleys, markets, and workshops each hold subtle cues, offering both danger and guidance. By observing, participating cautiously, and appreciating the city's rhythms, you have learned to move through it with awareness and resilience. The morning sun climbs slowly, brushing pale light across rooftops slick with overnight mist. The fog has thinned, leaving the streets glistening like wet cobblestones in a faint, muted reflection. You continue walking, your senses now fully attuned to the rhythms of Victorian London, recognizing that survival is as much about observation as it is about action. Each street corner, each alley, and each shopfront offers subtle lessons in endurance. You notice the interplay of light and shadow, the soft murmur of early trade, and the occasional squawk of birds claiming rooftops as their territory. Even in daylight, the city hums with life, demanding attention and respect. You pass a small grocer setting out barrels of potatoes and sacks of flour, the smell of damp earth and fresh produce mingling in the early air. A mainstream historical fact comes to mind. Grocers often served as informal information hubs, passing along news about local events, shipments, and even scandals. You pause for a moment, appreciating how these simple establishments form the veins of urban life, quietly sustaining the neighborhoods around them. Observing their operations reinforces an important principle. Survival depends not just on movement or vigilance, but also on understanding networks of information and influence. A quirky detail catches your eye nearby. A street artist draws miniature chalk sketches on the pavement, depicting city scenes or tiny caricatures of passersby. Some pedestrians pause to watch, offering pennies or coins. You marvel at the ingenuity of such work. Art as survival, humor as currency, observation as livelihood. Historians still argue whether such street art was primarily a form of personal expression or an entrepreneurial tactic, but you recognize it as both. A creative adaptation to urban life, a small patch of color in a gray world. The market square ahead is alive with movement. Vendors shout prices, children weave between carts, and laborers carry heavy loads to waiting carriages. The city's energy is infectious, and you find yourself moving more fluidly now, almost part of the flow. Survival here is not about avoidance, but integration, understanding the patterns of behavior, the unspoken rules, and the subtle hierarchies that govern interactions. A lamplighter walks past, extinguishing his last lamps, nodding to a fruit seller arranging apples. These small gestures, acknowledgement, timing, precision, form the quiet backbone of urban endurance. You approach a canal near the docklands, the water dark and reflective, rippling faintly with the movements of small barges. The smell of salt, coal, and riverweed mixes with the faint aroma of bread from nearby bakeries. A mainstream historical fact. Canals were critical arteries of commerce, transporting goods and raw materials through the city and beyond. Their presence created both opportunities and hazards for those navigating the adjacent streets. You pause to watch a small boat being guided by two men, the effort synchronized, purposeful, and oddly graceful. Survival in this environment requires attention to both human and environmental currents, anticipating movement and adapting constantly. You move on, the streets narrowing into quieter alleys where the early sunlight barely penetrates. Children play in these hidden corners, their laughter echoing softly off brick walls. A quirky observation. Some children carried small charms or trinkets believed to ward off bad luck, tiny acts of superstition that provided psychological comfort amid urban uncertainty. You smile softly, thinking of the way humans instinctively create layers of protection, ritual, and reassurance to navigate risk. A faint smell of coal smoke draws your attention to a small forge tucked behind a row of buildings. The blacksmith hammers steadily, sparks flicking like fireflies across the damp stones. Historians still argue whether blacksmith's influence extended beyond craft into informal social authority. But watching him at work, you sense the weight of expertise, of physical mastery, and of the subtle power embedded in knowing one's trade. Survival often relies on such mastery, the ability to perform a skill flawlessly, repeatedly, in service of both livelihood and community. Further along, a narrow street widens into a square where people pause to drink from a public fountain. Water glints in the morning sun, splashing quietly into stone basins. You touch the cool surface, letting it remind you of the continuity of daily life. Simple acts like drinking, washing, and observing form invisible scaffolds that sustain urban existence. A quirky detail surfaces. Some residents would mark the edges of fountains with chalk or small notches, signaling water quality or the best time to collect. You imagine these subtle signals, a secret knowledge system woven into the daily rhythm of survival. The hum of commerce grows steadily. Vendors arrange vegetables, bread, and fish, shouting prices that rise and fall in a peculiar cadence. You move with care, noting the timing of steps, the direction of carts, and the interactions between sellers and buyers. Survival here demands constant recalibration of attention, awareness, and judgment. Historians still debate whether market chaos improved resilience or merely added to urban stress. But for you, it is a living classroom. The city teaches through observation and participation. Turning a corner, you encounter a quiet courtyard bathed in early sunlight. Laundry hangs overhead, swaying gently in a light breeze. The smell of damp fabric mingles with the faint sweetness of baking bread nearby. A woman sweeps the steps of her doorway, careful to keep the space tidy. You pause, reflecting on how ordinary routines, cleaning, cooking, arranging, preparing, act as survival strategies, providing structure in an otherwise unpredictable environment. You continue down the street, noting the subtle signs of urban life, the tilt of a doorway, the placement of a cart, the posture of a passerby. Every detail informs your movement, your timing, your awareness. Small acts of observation accumulate into a comprehensive understanding of the city's hidden rhythms. Survival is no longer just physical. It is mental, social, and perceptual, requiring constant attention to the interplay between environment and human behavior. Finally, you reach a small park tucked between rows of buildings. The grass glistens with dew, and birds chirp softly in the trees. The city's noise fades slightly here, replaced by the gentle rhythm of nature coexisting with urban life. You sit on a low bench, letting the morning warmth seep into your bones. This is the moment when the lessons of the night and early morning converge. Attention, observation, small kindnesses, rhythm, and patience have carried you through. The city, in all its fog, grime, and human ingenuity, has revealed itself as both challenge and sanctuary. You lean back, feeling the weight of the city soften against your senses. The fog is gone now, the light gentle, and the streets have transformed into spaces of quiet possibility. You notice the subtle hum of life around you, birds hopping, distant bells tolling, and the faint murmur of early conversations. Everything feels slower, calmer, as if the city itself has exhaled. Survival has taught you that vigilance need not be constant anxiety. It can be measured, practiced, and balanced with moments of stillness. Take a deep breath, letting the scents of earth, coal, and early morning produce mingle. Imagine the warmth of bread, the faint flicker of lamplight, the soft laughter of children, and the steady rhythm of laborers beginning their day. Each sensation reminds you that life continues in small, intricate patterns, and that observing, participating, and respecting these patterns can offer reassurance, even in the most unpredictable surroundings. As the sun rises fully, casting long, golden shadows across the cobblestones, feel your body relax with the city. Every step, every observation, every minor act of kindness or awareness has added to your understanding of survival, not merely as a skill, but as a gentle, enduring presence in the flow of life. Let the streets fade into memory, the fog settling like a soft curtain, and the gentle pulse of London lull you into calm. Now, as you close your eyes, let the sounds, smells, and rhythms of Victorian London carry you into a quiet, restorative rest. The lessons of the city linger softly, tucked beneath the hum of your breath and the gentle stretch of morning light. You are safe. You are steady. You are ready to drift. Sweet dreams.